Hey everyone, Miss Arita here. It is that time again, time for us to read the next few chapters of Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. I'm really excited to read this with you guys tonight. I'm really interested to see what's going to happen. So, as you remember before, uh, Willy Wonka and Charlie and his family were in outer space in the Great Glass Elevator. They stayed at they went to the space hotel, and the vermicious knids from a different planet, they're kind of like aliens, I guess, we're going to attack them. Willy Wonka thought. He said they're very evil, or they're very, not evil. It's not great. They're not good aliens. So he was worried they were going to attack them and everything. And then they ended up leaving the space hotel. And now, and he ended up, the vermicious knids ended up getting into a kind of like a fight with him and everything, and in the Great Glass Elevator. And now they are hopefully heading back to the Earth. I'm not entirely sure, so I guess we'll find out. All right, well, it's that time. So here we go at chapter 9, Gobbled Up. On the day when all this was happening, no factories were open anywhere in the world. All offices and schools were closed. Nobody moved away from the television screens, not even for a couple of minutes to get a Coke or to feed the baby. The tension was unbearable. Everybody heard the American president's invitation to the men from Mars to visit him in the White House, and they heard the weird rhyming reply, which sounded rather threatening. They also heard a piercing scream, Grandma Josephine, and a little later on they heard someone shouting, "Scram, scram, scram," Mr. Wonka. Nobody could make head or tail of the shouting. They took it to be some kind of Martian language. When the 8 mysterious astronauts suddenly rushed back into their glass capsule and broke away from the space hotel, you could almost hear a great sigh of relief that rose up from the peoples of the Earth. Telegrams and messages poured into the White House, congratulating the president upon his brilliant handling of the frightening situation. The president himself remained calm and thoughtful. He sat at his desk, rolling a small piece of wet chewing gum between his finger and thumb. He was waiting for the moment when he could flick it at Miss Tibbs without her seeing him. He flicked it and missed Miss Tibbs, but hit the Secretary of the Interior on the tip of his nose. "Do you think the men from Mars have accepted my invitation to the White House?" the president asked. "Of course they had," said the Foreign Secretary. "It was a brilliant speech, sir." "They're probably on their way down here right now," said Miss Tibbs. "Go and wash that nasty, sticky chewing gum off your fingers quickly. They could be here any minute." "Let's have a song first," said the president. "Please sing another one about me, Nanny." The nurse's song. This is part of the chapter. "The mighty man of whom I sing, the greatest of them all, was once a teeny little thing, just 18 inches tall. I knew him as a tiny tot, I nursed him on my knee. I used to sit him on the pot and wait for him to wee. I always washed between his toes and cut his little nails. I brushed his hair and wiped his nose and weighed him on the scales. Through happy childhood days he strayed, and as all the nice children should. I smacked him when he disobeyed and stopped when he was good. It soon began to dawn on me he wasn't very bright, because when he was 23 he couldn't read or write. What shall we do?" his parents sobbed. "The boy has got the vapors. He couldn't even get a job delivering the papers." "Aha," I said, "this little clot could be a politician." "Nanny," he cried, "oh, Nanny, what a super proposition." "Okay," I said, "let's learn and note the art of politics. Let's teach you how to miss the boat and how to drop some bricks, and how to win the people's vote and lots of other tricks. Let's learn to make a speech a day upon the TV screen in which you never, never say exactly what you mean. And most importantly, by the way, it's not to let your teeth decay and keep your fingers clean. And now that I'm 89, it's too late to repent. The fault was mine, the little swine became the president." Here's, let me see. There is Nanny and the president as she's singing her song about the president. "Bravo, Nanny," cried the president, clapping his hands. "Hooray," shouted the others. "Well done, Miss Vice President, ma'am. Brilliant, tremendous." "My goodness," said the president, "those men from Mars will be here any moment. What on earth are we going to give them for lunch? Where's my chief cook?" The chief cook was a Frenchman. He was also a French spy, and at this moment was listening at the keyhole of the president's study. I see, Monsieur le President, he said, bursting in. Chief cook, said the president, what do men from Mars eat for lunch? Mars bars, said the chief cook. Baked or boiled? Asked the president. Oh, baked, of course, Monsieur le President. You will ruin a Mars bars by boiling. The voice of astronaut Shuckworth cut in over the loudspeaker in the president's study. Request permission to link up and go aboard the space hotel, he said. Permission granted, said the president. Go right ahead, Shuckworth. It's all clear now, thanks to me. And so the large commuter capsule, piloted by Shuckworth, Shanks, and Shaler, with all the hotel managers and assistant managers, and hall porters and pastry chefs, and bellhops and waitresses, and chambermaids on board, moved in smoothly and linked up with the giant space hotel. Hey there, we've lost our television picture, called the president. I'm afraid the camera got smashed against the side of the space hotel, Mr. President, Shuckworth replied. The president said a very rude word into the microphone, and 10 million children across the nation began repeating it gleefully and got smacked by their parents. All astronauts and 150 hotel staff safely aboard Space Hotel, Shuckworth reported over the radio. We are now standing in the lobby. And what do you think of it all? Asked the president. He knew the whole world was listening in, and he wanted Shuckworth to say how wonderful it was. Shuckworth didn't let him down. Gee, Mr. President, it's just great, he said. It's unbelievable. It's so enormous. And so, it's kind of hard to find the words to describe it. It's so truly grand, especially the chandeliers and the carpets and all. I have the chief hotel manager, Mr. Walter W. Wall, beside me now. He would like the honor of a word with you, sir. Put him on, said the president. Mr. President, sir, this is Walter Wall. What a sumptuous hotel this is. The decorations are superb. Have you noticed that all the carpets are wall to wall, Mr. Walter Wall? Said the president. I have indeed, Mr. President. All the wallpaper is wall to wall too, Mr. Walter Wall. Yes, sir, Mr. President. Isn't that something? It's going to be a real pleasure running a beautiful like this. Hey, what's going on over there? Something's coming out of the elevators. Help! Suddenly, the loudspeaker in the president's study gave out a series of the most ghastly screams and yells. Ah! Ow! Eh! Help! 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 What on earth's going on? Said the president. Shuckworth, are you there? Shuckworth, Shanks, Shaler, Mr. Walter Wall, where are you all? What's happening? The screams continued. They were so loud the president had to put his fingers in his ears. Every house in the world that had a television or radio receiver heard those awful screams. There were other noises too, loud grunts and snortings and crunching sounds. Then there was silence. Frantically, the president called the space hotel on the radio. Houston called the space hotel. The president called Houston. Houston called the president. Then both of them called the space hotel again. But answer came there none. Up there in space, all was silent. Something nasty's happened, said the president. It's those men from Mars, said the ex-chief of the army. I told you to let me blow them up. Space control in Houston? The president grabbed the mic on his desk. Leave this to me, Houston, he shouted. President Gilligrass here, receiving you loud and clear. Go ahead. Astronaut Shuckworth here, Mr. President, back aboard the commuter capsule. Thank heavens. What happened, Shuckworth? Who's with you? We're most of us here, Mr. President, I'm glad to say. Shanks and Shaler are with me and a whole bunch of other folks. I guess we lost maybe a couple dozen people altogether, pastry chefs, hall porters, that sort of thing. It sure was a scramble to get out of that place alive. What do you mean you lost 24 people? Shouted the president. How did you lose them? Gobbled up, replied Shuckworth. One gulp and that was it. I saw a big 6-foot-tall assistant manager being swallowed up just like you'd swallow a lump of ice cream, Mr. President. No chewing, nothing. Just down the hatch. But who? Yelled the president. Who are you talking about? Who did the swallowing? Hold it, cried Shuckworth. Oh, my lord, here they are. Oh, come now. They're coming after us. They're swarming us out of the space hotel. They're coming out in swarms. You'll have to excuse me a moment, Mr. President. No time to talk right now. Chapter 10. Commuter Capsule in Trouble. Knid Attack, number 1. While Shuckworth, Shanks, and Shaler were being chased out of the space hotel by the knids, Mr. Wonka's great glass elevator was orbiting the Earth at tremendous speed. Mr. Wonka had all his booster rockets firing, and the elevator was reaching speeds of 34,000 miles an hour instead of the normal 17,000. They were trying, you see, to get away from the huge, angry, vermicious knid with the purple behind. Mr. Wonka wasn't afraid of it, but Grandma Josephine was petrified. Every time she looked at it, she let out a piercing scream and clapped her hands over her eyes. But of course, 34,000 miles an hour is dawdling to a knid. Healthy young canids think nothing of traveling a million miles between lunch and supper, and then another million before breakfast the next day. How else could they commute between the planet Vermes and other stars? Mr. Wonka should have known this and saved his rocket power, but he kept right on going, and Giant Canid kept right on cruising effortlessly alongside, glaring into the elevator with its wicked red eye. You people have bruised my backside, the Canid seemed to be saying, and in the end, I'm going to get you for that. They had been streaking around the earth like this for 45 minutes when Charlie, who was floating comfortably beside Grandpa Joe near the ceiling, said suddenly, "There's something ahead. Can you see it, Grandpa? Straight in front of us." "I can, Charlie, I can. Good heavens, it's a space hotel." "It can't be, Grandpa. We left it miles behind us long ago." "Aha," said Mr. Wonka. "We've been going so fast, we've gone all the way around the earth and caught up with it again. A splendid effort." "And there's the commuter capsule. Can you see it, Grandpa? It's just behind the space hotel." "There's something else there, too, Charlie, if I'm not mistaken." "I know what those are," screamed Grandma Josephine. "They're vermicious canids. Turn back at once." "Reverse!" yelled Grandma Georgina. "Go the other way." "Dear lady," said Mr. Wonka, "this isn't an automobile on the highway. When you're in orbit, you cannot stop and you cannot go backward." "I don't care about that," shouted Grandma Josephine. "Put on the brakes. Stop. Backpedal. The canids will get us." Now let's for heaven's sake stop this nonsense once and for all," Mr. Wonka said sternly. "You know very well my elevator is completely canid-proof. You have nothing to fear." They were closer now, and they could see the canids pouring out from the tail of the space hotel and swarming like wasps around the commuter capsule. "They're attacking it," cried Charlie. "They're after the commuter capsule." It was a fearsome sight. The huge green egg-shaped canids were grouping themselves into squadrons, with about 20 canids to a squadron. Then each squadron formed itself into a line abreast with 1 yard between canids. Then one after another, the squadrons began attacking the commuter capsule. They attacked in reverse with their pointed rear ends in front, and they came in it at a fantastic speed. Wham! One squadron attacked, bounced off, and wheeled away. Crash! Another squadron smashed the side of the commuter capsule. "Get us out of here, you madman!" screamed Grandma Josephine. "What are you waiting for?" "They'll be coming after us next!" yelled Grandma Georgina. "For heaven's sake, man, turn back!" "I doubt very much if that capsule of theirs is canid-proof," said Mr. Wonka. "Then we must help them," cried Charlie. "We've got to do something. There are 150 people inside that thing." Down on Earth, in the White House study, the president and his advisors were listening in horror to the voices of the astronauts over the radio. "They're coming at us in droves," Shuckworth was shouting. "They're bashing us to bits." "But who?" yelled the president. "You haven't even told us who's attacking you." "These dirty, great, greenish-brown brutes with red eyes," shouted Shanks, butting in. "They're shaped like enormous eggs, and they're coming at us backwards." "Backwards?" cried the president. "Why backwards?" "Because their bottoms are even more pointy than their tops," shouted Shuckworth. "Look here. Here comes another lot. Bang! We won't be able to stand this much longer, Mr. President. The waitresses are screaming, and the chambermaids are all hysterical, and the bellhops are being sick, and all the hall porters are saying their prayers. What shall we do, Mr. President? What on earth shall we do?" "Fire your rockets, you idiot, and make a re-entry," shouted the president. "Come back to Earth immediately." "That's impossible," cried Shaller. "They've busted our rockets. They've smashed them to smithereens." "We're cooked, Mr. President," shouted Shanks. "We're done for dinner. Because even if they don't succeed in destroying the capsule, we'll have to stay up here in orbit for the rest of our lives. We can't make a re-entry without rockets." The president was sweating, and the sweat ran all the way down the back of his neck inside his collar. "Any moment now, Mr. President," Shakes went on, "we're going to lose contact with you altogether. There's another lot coming at us from the left, and they're aiming straight for our radio antenna. Here they come. I don't think we'll be able to—" The voice cut. The radio went dead. "Shanks!" cried the president. "Where are you, Shanks? Shuckworth! Shanks! Shalworth! Shucks! Shankler! Shankworth! Shuckler! Why don't you answer me?" Up in the great glass elevator, where they had no radio and could hear nothing of these conversations, Charlie was saying, "Surely their only hope is to make a re-entry and dive back to Earth quickly." "Yes," said Mr. Wonka, "but in order to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, they've got to kick themselves out of orbit. They've got to change course and head downward, and to do that, they need rockets. But their rocket tubes are all dented and bent. You can see that from here. They're crippled." "Why can't we tow them down?" Charlie asked. Mr. Wonka jumped. Even though he was floating, he somehow jumped. He was so excited he shot upward and hit his head on the ceiling. Then he spun round 3 times in the air and cried, "Charlie, you've got it! That's it! We'll tow them out of orbit. To the buttons, quick!" "What do we tow them with?" asked Grandpa Joe. "Our neckties?" "Don't you worry about a little thing like that," cried Mr. Wonka. "My great glass elevator is ready for anything. In we go! Into the breach, dear friends, into the breach!" "Stop him!" screamed. "You better just close your eyes tight and stick your fingers in your ears." Chapter 11. The Battle of the Knids. "Grandpa Joe, sir," shouted Mr. Wonka, "kindly jet yourself over to the far corner of the elevator there and turn that handle. It lowers the rope." "A rope's no good, Mr. Wonka. The Knids will bite through a rope in 1 second." "It's a steel rope," said Mr. Wonka. "It's made of rain-scorched steel. If they try to bite through that, their teeth will splinter like spillikins. To your buttons, Charlie. You've got to help me maneuver. We're going right over to the top of the commuter capsule, and then we'll try to hook it somewhere and get a firm hold." Like a battleship going into action, the great glass elevator, with booster rockets firing, moved smoothly in over the top of the enormous commuter capsule. The Knids immediately stopped attacking the capsule and went for the elevator. Squadron after squadron of great vermicious Knids flung themselves furiously against Mr. Wonka's marvelous machine. Wham! Crash! Bang! The noise was thunderous and terrible. The elevator was tossed about the sky like a leaf, and inside it, Grandma Josephine, Grandma Georgina, and Grandpa George, floating in their nightshirts, were all yowling and screeching and flapping their arms and calling for help. Mrs. Bucket had wrapped her arms around Mr. Bucket and was clasping him so tightly that one of his shirt buttons punctured his skin. Charlie and Mr. Wonka, as cool as 2 cantaloupes, were up near the ceiling, working the booster rocket controls, and Grandpa Joe, shouting war cries and throwing curses at the Knids, was down below turning the handle that unwound the steel rope. At the same time, he was watching the rope through the glass floor of the elevator. "Starboard a bit, Charlie," shouted Grandpa Joe. "We're right on top of her now. Forward a couple yards. Mr. Wonka, I'm trying to get the hook hooked around the stumpy thing sticking out in front there. Hold it. I've got it. That's it. Forward a little more now, and see if it holds. More, more." The big steel rope tightened. It held. And now, wonder of wonders, with her booster rockets blazing, the elevator began to tow the huge commuter capsule forward and away. "Full speed ahead," shouted Grandpa Joe. "She's going to hold. She's holding. She's holding fine." "All boosters firing," cried Mr. Wonka. And the elevator leaped ahead. Still the rope held. Mr. Wonka jetted himself to Grandpa Joe and shook him warmly by the hand. "Well done, sir," he said. "You did a brilliant job under heavy fire." Charlie looked back to the commuter capsule some 30 yards behind them on the end of the tow line. It had little windows up front, and in the windows he could clearly see the flabbergasted faces of Shuckworth, Shanks, and Chowler. Charlie waved to them and gave them a thumbs-up signal. They didn't wave back. They simply gaped. They couldn't believe what was happening. Grandpa Joe blew himself upward and hovered beside Charlie, bubbling with excitement. "Charlie, my boy," he said, "we've been through a few funny things together lately, but never anything like this." "Grandpa, where are the Knids? They've suddenly vanished." Everyone looked round. The only Knid in sight was their old friend with the purple behind, still cruising alongside its usual place, still glaring into the elevator. "Just a minute," cried Grandma Josephine. "What's that I see over there?" Again they looked, and this time, sure enough, away in the distance, in the deep blue sky of outer space, they saw a massive cloud of vermicious Knids wheeling and circling like a fleet of bombers. "If you think we're out of the woods yet, you're crazy," shouted Grandma Georgina. "I fear no Knids," said Mr. Wonka. "We've got them beaten now." "Poppy rotten pigwash," said Grandma Josephine. "Any moment now they'll be at us again. Look at them. They're coming in. They're coming closer." This was true. The huge fleet of Knids had moved in at an incredible speed, and was now flying level with the great glass elevator, a couple of 100 yards away on the right-hand side. The one with the bump on its rear end was much closer, only 20 yards away on the same side. "It's changing shape," cried Charlie. "That nearest one. What's it going to do? It's getting longer and longer." And indeed, it was. The mammoth egg-shaped body was slowly stretching itself out like chewing gum, becoming longer and longer and thinner, until, in the end, it looked exactly like a long, slimy green serpent, as thick as a thick tree and as long as a football field. At the front end were the eyes, big and white with red centers. At the back of a kind of tapering tail, and at the very end of the tail was an enormous, round, swollen bump it had gotten when it crashed against the elevator. The people floating inside the elevator watched and waited. Then they saw the long rope-like knid turning and coming straight, but quite slowly going toward the great glass elevator. Now it began actually wrapping its ropey body around the elevator itself. Once around it went, then twice around, and very horrifying it was to be inside and to see that soft green body squishing against the outside. "Trying to crash us in its coils," wailed Grandma Georgina. "Never," said Mr. Wonka. Charlie glanced quickly back at the commuter capsule. The sheet white faces of Shuckworth, Shanks, and Showler were pressed against the glass of the little windows, terror-struck, stupefied, stunned, their mouths open, their expressions frozen like fish fingers. Once again, Charlie gave them the thumbs-up signal. Here's the vermicious knid in the elevator. Showler acknowledged it with a sickly grin, but that was all. "Oh, oh, oh," screamed Grandma Josephine. "Get that beastly squishing thing away from here." Having curled its body twice around the elevator, the knid now proceeded to tie a knot with its two ends, a good strong knot, left over right, then right over left. When it had pulled the knot tight, there remained about 5 yards of one end hanging loose. This was the end with the eyes on it. But it didn't hang loose for long. It quickly curled itself into the shape of a huge hook, and the hook stuck straight out sideways from the elevator as though waiting for something else to hook itself onto it. While all this was going on, nobody had noticed what the other knids were up to. "Mr. Wonka!" Charlie cried. "Look at the others! What are they doing?" What indeed? These two had all changed shape and had become longer, but not nearly as long or so thin as the first one. Each of them had turned itself into a kind of thick rod, and the rod was curled around at both ends, at the tail end and at the head end, so that it made a double-ended hook. And now all the hooks were linking up, and the knid at the very front of the chain, whose front hook was not, of course, hooked up to anything, was leading them in a wide circle and sweeping in toward the great glass elevator. "Hey!" shouted Grandpa Joe. "They're going to hook up with this brute who's tied himself around us." "And tow us away!" cried Charlie. "To the planet Vermes," gasped Grandma Josephine. 18,427 miles from here." "They can't do that," cried Mr. Wonka. "We're doing the towing around here." "They're going to link up, Mr. Wonka," Charlie said. "They really are. Can't we stop them? They're going to tow us away. They're going to tow the people we're towing away as well." "Do something, you old fool," shrieked Grandma Georgina. "Don't just float about looking at them." "I must admit," said Mr. Wonka, "that for the first time in my life, I find myself at a bit of a loss." They all stared in horror through the glass at the long chain of vermicious knids. The leader of the chain was coming closer and closer. The hook, with two big angry eyes on it, was out and ready. In 30 seconds, it would link up with the hook of the knid wrapped around the elevator. "I want to go home," wailed Grandma Josephine. "Why can't we all go home?" "Great thundering tomcats!" cried Mr. Wonka. "Home is right. What on earth am I thinking of? Come on, Charlie, quick, re-entry. You take the yellow button. Press it for all you're worth. I'll handle this lot." Charlie and Mr. Wonka literally flew to the buttons. "Hold your hats," shouted Mr. Wonka. "Grab your gizzards. We're going down." Rockets started firing out of the elevator from all sides. It tilted and gave a sickening lurch, and then plunged downward into the Earth's atmosphere at a simply colossal speed. "Retro rockets!" bellowed Mr. Wonka. "I mustn't forget to fire the retro rockets." He flew over to another series of buttons and started playing on them like a piano. The elevator was now streaking downward, head first. upside down, and all the passengers found themselves floating upside down as well. "Help!" screamed Grandma Georgina. "All the blood's going to my head." "Then turn yourself the other way up," said Mr. Wonka. "That's easy enough, isn't it?" Everyone blew and puffed and turned somersaults in the air until at last they were all the right way up. "How's the tow rope holding, Grandpa?" Mr. Wonka called out. "They're still with us, Mr. Wonka, sir. The rope's holding fine." It was an amazing sight, the great elevator streaking down toward the earth with the huge commuter capsule in tow behind it. But the long chain of knids was coming after them, following them down, keeping pace with them easily. And now the hook of the leading knid in the chain was actually reaching out and grasping for the hook made by the knid on the elevator. "We're too late," screamed Grandma Georgina. "They're going to link up and haul us back." "I think not," said Mr. Wonka. "Don't you remember what happens when a knid enters the Earth's atmosphere at high speed? He gets red hot. He burns away in a long fiery trail. He becomes a shooting knid. Soon these dirty beasts will start popping like popcorn." As they streaked on downward, sparks began to fly off the sides of the elevator. The glass glowed pink, then red, then scarlet. Sparks also began to fly off the long chain of knids, and the leading knid in the chain started to shine like a red-hot poker. So did all the others. So did the great slimy brute coiled around the elevator itself. This one, in fact, was trying frantically to uncoil itself and get away, but it was having trouble untying the knot, and in another 10 seconds, it began to sizzle. Inside the elevator, they could actually hear the sizzling. It made a noise like bacon frying. And exactly the same sort of thing was happening to the other 1,000 knids in the chain. The tremendous heat was simply sizzling them up. They were red hot, every one of them. Then suddenly they became white hot, and they gave out a dazzling white light. "They're shooting knids!" cried Charlie. "What a splendid sight," said Mr. Wonka. "It's better than fireworks." In a few seconds more, the knids had blown away in a cloud of ashes, and it was all over. "We've done it!" cried Mr. Wonka. "They've been roasted to a crisp. They've been frizzled to a fritter. We're saved." "What do you mean, saved?" said Grandma Josephine. "We'll all be frizzled ourselves if it goes on any longer. We'll be barbecued like beefsteaks. Look at that glass. It's hotter than a fizzgig." "Have no fears, dear lady," answered Mr. Wonka. "My elevator is air-conditioned, ventilated, aerated, and automated in every way possible. We're going to be all right now." "I haven't the faintest idea of what's going on," said Mrs. Bucket, making one of her rare speeches. "But whatever it is, I don't like it." "Aren't you enjoying it, Mother?" Charlie asked her. "No," she said, "I'm not. Nor is your father." "What a great sight it is," said Mr. Wonka. "Just look at the earth down there, Charlie, getting bigger and bigger." "And us going to meet it at 2,000 miles an hour," groaned Grandma Georgina. "How are you going to slow down, for heaven's sake? You didn't think of that, did you?" "He's got parachutes," Charlie told her. "I'll bet he's got great big parachutes that open just before we hit." "Parachutes," said Mr. Wonka with contempt. "Parachutes are only for astronauts and sissies. And anyway, we don't want to slow down. We want to speed up. I told you already we've got to be going at an absolutely tremendous speed when we hit. Otherwise, we'll never punch our way in through the roof of the chocolate factory." "How about the commuter capsule?" Charlie asked anxiously. "We'll be letting them go in a few seconds now," Mr. Wonka answered. "They do have parachutes, 3 of them, to slow them down the last bit." "How do you know we won't land in the Pacific Ocean?" said Grandma Josephine. "I don't," said Mr. Wonka. "But we all know how to swim, do we not?" "This man," shouted Grandma Josephine, "is as crazy as a crumpet." "He's cracked as a crawfish," said Grandma Georgina. Down and down plunged the great glass elevator. Nearer and nearer came the earth below. Oceans and continents rushed up to meet them, getting bigger every second. "Grandpa Joe, sir, throw out the rope. Let it go," ordered Mr. Wonka. "They'll be all right now so long as their parachutes are working." "Rope gone," called out Grandpa Joe, and the huge commuter capsule, on its own now, began to swing away to one side. Charlie waved to the 3 astronauts in the front window. None of them waved back. They were still sitting there in a kind of shocked daze, gaping at the old ladies and the old men and the small boy floating about in the glass elevator. "It won't be long now," said Mr. Wonka, reaching for a row of tiny pale blue buttons in one corner. "We shall soon know whether we are alive or dead. Keep very quiet, please, for this final part. I have to concentrate awfully hard. Otherwise, we'll come down in the wrong place. They plunged into a thick bank of clouds, and for 10 seconds they could see nothing. When they came out of the clouds, the commuter capsule had disappeared, and the earth was very close, and there was only a great spread of land beneath them, with mountains and forests, then fields and trees, then a small town. There it is, shied Mr. Wonka. My chocolate factory. My beloved chocolate factory. You mean Charlie's chocolate factory, said Grandpa Joe. That's right, said Mr. Wonka, addressing Charlie. I'd clean forgotten. I do apologize to you, my dear boy. Of course it's yours. And here we go. Through the glass floor of the elevator, Charlie caught a quick glimpse of the huge red roof and the tall chimneys of the giant factory. They were plunging straight down onto it. Hold your breath, shied Mr. Wonka. Hold your nose, fasten your seatbelts, and say your prayers. We're going through the roof. Chapter 12. Back to the chocolate factory. Crash! And then the noise of splintering wood and broken glass and absolute darkness, and the most awful crunching sounds as the elevator rushed on, smashing everything before it. All at once the crashing noises stopped, and the ride became smoother, and the elevator seemed to be traveling on guides or rails, twisting and turning like a roller coaster. And when the lights came on, Charlie suddenly realized that for the last few seconds he hadn't been floating at all. He had been standing normally on the floor. Mr. Wonka was on the floor too, and so was Grandpa Joe and Mr. and Mrs. Bucket, and also the big bed. As for Grandma Josephine, Grandma Georgina, and Grandpa George, they must have fallen right back into the bed because they were now all three on top of it and scrambling to get under the blanket. We're through, yelled Mr. Wonka. We've done it. We're in. Grandpa Joe grabbed him by the hand and said, Well done, sir. How splendid. What a magnificent job. Where in the world are we now? Said Mrs. Bucket. We're back, Mother, Charlie cried. We're in the chocolate factory. I'm very glad to hear it, said Mrs. Bucket. But didn't we come rather a long way round? We had to, said Mr. Wonka, to avoid the traffic. There's Mr. Wonka and Charlie. I've never met a man, said Grandma Georgina, who talks so much absolute nonsense. A little nonsense now and then is relished by the wisest men, Mr. Wonka said. Why don't you pay some attention to where this crazy elevator is going, shouted Grandma Josephine, and stop foodling about. A little foodling round and round will stop you going up the spout, said Mr. Wonka. What did I tell you, cried Grandma Georgina. He's round the twist. He's bogged as a beetle. He's dotty as a dingbat. He's got rats in the roof. I want to go home. Too late, said Mr. Wonka. We're there. The elevator stopped. The doors opened, and Charlie found himself looking out once again at the great chocolate room with the chocolate river and the chocolate waterfall, where everything was eatable. The trees, the leaves, the grass, the pebbles, and even the rocks. And there to meet them were hundreds and hundreds of tiny Oompa Loompas, all waving and cheering. It was a sight that took one's breath away. Even Grandma Georgina was stunned into silence for a few seconds, but not for long. Who in the world are all these peculiar little men? She said. They're Oompa Loompas, Charlie told her. They're wonderful. You'll love them. Shh, said Grandpa Joe. Listen, Charlie. The drums are starting up. They're going to sing. There's the Oompa Loompas. Alleluia, sang the Oompa Loompas. Oh, alleluia and hooray. Our Willy Wonka's back today. We thought you'd never make it home. We thought you'd left us all alone. We knew that you would have to face some frightful creatures up in space. We even thought we heard the crunch of someone eating you for lunch. All right, chimed Mr. Wonka, laughing and raising both hands. Thank you both for your welcome. Thank you for your welcome. Will some of you please help to get this bed out of here? 50 Oompa Loompas ran forward and pushed the bed with the three old ones in it out of the elevator. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket, both looking completely overwhelmed by it all, followed the bed out. Then came Grandpa Joe, Charlie, and Mr. Wonka. Now, said Mr. Wonka, addressing Grandpa George, Grandma Georgina, and Grandma Josephine, up you hop out of that bed and let's get cracking. I'm sure you'll all want to lend a hand running the factory. Who, us? Said Grandma Josephine. Yes, you, said Mr. Wonka. You must be joking, said Grandma Georgina. I never joke, said Mr. Wonka. Now just you listen to me, sir, said old Grandpa George, sitting up straight in bed. You've gotten us into quite enough troubles and trumbles for one day. I've gotten you out of them, too, said Mr. Wonka proudly, and I'm going to get you out of that bed as well. You see if I don't. And that brings us to chapter 13, How Wonkavite Was Invented. So tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, I'll be reading the next few chapters of Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. I look forward to seeing you there. Bye.